Welcome to This Old App, a podcast about learning, coding, smashing stuff together, breaking things apart, startups, failing, winning, and any other buzzwords we can think of.
Hey, Don. This week, I thought we would talk about test-driven development, but maybe we talk about testing in general.
Okay.
Test-driven development is a small subset of the overall quality control and testing mechanism, and we've talked about this at different times. But how does a development team or a developer best set up an environment for quality code development where testing is built into the process?
Sure.
And that's the kind of question of the day for me. The reason it came up, or the reason I'm bringing it up, is that Megan and I went to Northwestern Boot Camp has a quarterly event where the students that have done their final projects can go to a round table, or they basically go to a networking room with little, those high tables, put a laptop down and meet different people from other classrooms and some companies that are like recruiting, and they show off the projects they did. And I kind of went because I had been substitute teaching for 3 or 4 of the groups that were there, and I kind of wanted to see what they were working on and kind of send them off into the next place they want to go. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, the curriculum doesn't have a tremendous amount of time to teach you like that next thing you need to learn, because everyone says, what should I learn next? What do I need to do? And usually I say to people, you should start dabbling in testing. If you're in Rails, you use something you can use the native test library that comes with Rails, or you can use what I typically use, RSpec. And there's another one called Minitest. And then in JavaScript, you would be using Mocha, Jasmine, Jest, a whole bunch of different ones. And so I just wanted to talk about your experience with test-driven development. I'll answer right now that you haven't done it a lot. Because we've talked about that. But I want to talk about it because there are a lot of people out there that hear that they should be doing it and they aren't. And there are reasons why they aren't, and that's not necessarily a bad reason. And there are people that think, I don't do testing, and I'm like, you are a liar. Everyone tests. It's just all different how you do it. So I just wanted to kind of talk about this testing environment, testing from the perspective of, I would say I'm a 60 to 70% tester. I believe I should do more of it, but I also have time constraints and expertise that doesn't get me there to 100%. And you have less. And I just want to kind of talk about that whole experience and constraints around it so that people out there listening that are like, I know I should do this. Maybe we kind of bring to life that why you can do it, the benefits, and what are the blockers for it.
Well, so for Aspire EDU, we've got a good percentage of our code covered with tests. Now, that said, that's not code that I've written a lot of. For Aspire EDU, my job is more oversight management, that sort of thing. For my own projects, the only time I have ever written a test is, oh gracious, maybe when I was actually going through a video course or something, and part of it was, here's how you do testing in Ruby, Rails, JavaScript, Python, whatever it was. Outside of that, the only other time I've done it is back, oh gracious, this was probably 5 years ago. There was a coding dojo here in Orlando that I'd go to every couple months. And the idea there was to do little exercises, but do them using test-driven development. So write the tests first, make them pass, then refactor. So red, green, refactor. And those were usually led by a person by the name of David, who we're going to have on here shortly in the future, I hope, to talk about some other things. And I get, so this is where I fall on all this. If I were to have to write things that are production ready and potentially multiple people on the team working with it, all that testing makes perfect sense. Yeah. When I'm trying to put a proof of concept down to where I'm just trying to see if I can do something and make it work, it's not that testing's wrong. It's that it does not scratch that itch.
Yeah.
The perfect example is what I was working on when you interrupted me so that we could record this. We've got for construction specialties, we've got new work orders that come in probably 10 to 20 a day, depending on the day. Mm-hmm. And we have a process when it comes in, somebody fills out a PDF form for it so that we can make a PDF out of it. And then we make a Trello card out of it. And then we send an email to the person it's being dispatched to. The first two steps, the filling out of the PDF form and the filling out of the Trello card, mean we're re-entering the exact same information twice. So I've been sitting there messing with an Express application to just make a form.
Yeah.
Just a plain form, say, fill this out, and you hit submit. It's going to create that PDF. It's going to create that Trello card done. Does it need tests? Sure, as it evolves, maybe. But I did not grow up in the TDD era.
Yeah.
And it was not drilled into me, so I have a hard time wrapping my brain around when to get into it. So that's about where I sit on all of it.
Well, if you talk to the TDD folks, they will tell you, and I don't disagree, that the easiest time to start testing on any app is at the very beginning.
Right.
And that more often than not, if what you're building is useful, you're going to want to have tests on it later. Because someone's going to come to you with a feature and you're like, yeah, I'll add that. And someone's going to come to you with another feature. And you're like, yeah, I'll go ahead and add that. And then you'll have 4 or 5 features, and then demand will grow. And then you're like, oh man, this is actually production and needs to scale. And we want to add 7 more features and we need tests. Oh, now we're in that valley of no tests. So, but like the other point is that this is a throwaway app. And if it really matters, we'll rebuild it anyway. That's the other side of it, I think.
Well, and the side I'm sitting on is not necessarily that's a throwaway app. It's more that I'm having to exercise what I know and learn new things just to make this work. And you want me to write tests first, learn how to write tests first? Why that if the minute I know because I went through this last night. I spent an hour and a half trying to get, for some reason, Chrome would not see localhost. I couldn't tell you why. I still don't know why. Because what I ended up doing was I ended up just throwing away what I had and starting over, and all of a sudden Chrome saw localhost. So I don't know what it was. But if it's those, we all have them when we develop, where we hit these stupid things that it's just not working. And we don't know why. And when I have an end in mind, it's easier to fight through and push through those. I can tell you, if I'd hit one of those while trying to set up some tests, I would have thrown it all to the side and said, I'll deal with it later, and then just moved on to the actual coding. Yeah. Because it's not scratching the itch. The itch. I'm right now. I've got two fields on the form, and it's printing to the PDF, and so that my itch has been scratched. That all works. So it's a matter of finishing out the rest of the fields, and then I got something usable.
Yeah.
So then it's a question of, okay, now do I go back and rewrite the test, and we can get into that. But it's that I understand that writing tests, and I'll let you talk to this a little. Writing tests can help prove the concept, but not as well as actually seeing it work.
So now I'll go into my little diatribe about why testing is not what, I don't know that the way you described is how I think about it. If I sit down and write an application, and let's just say I'm writing a simple function to get one thing done, but it involves Express, like the server, right? So typically I write some code, I save it to the file. It maybe hot loads on the server, hot reloads, or I need to refresh the browser to see if my code change and the request being made against the server is doing what I think it should do. So I code, and then I manually switch my screen and context to the browser client, and I refresh and I look. I either get an error message or it does something I expect. It's like either it does something I expect or it doesn't. Those are the two kind of the binary Boolean like way I'm looking at it. And I just proceed that way the rest of the project. Code it here. Like I code this function, go and look at the browser, and it says, yes, it works or not. Maybe I get a stack trace to go through and find a bug. Maybe I don't. But if I take the time to write a little bit of code that tests the output of the server response request, I write that test. I say, this is what I expect to happen. I expect the response will come back with this particular payload or this message or this status or what have you. I don't have to go to the browser at all. I can sit staring right directly at my coding screen, and I say, I can actually trigger, I can have it where there's a callback on saving the file, and it says, I'll run the test for you. So that very first function I've got has a little bit of code looking at it saying, what does the developer, me, expect to come out of this function? If I give it a certain input, what is the output? If I give it 3 different inputs, what are the 3 different outputs that are expected? And if it fails, I kind of know exactly where it's failing, and I can go in and change it and fix it till I get the passing green flag or whatever. But then I come in with the second function, and maybe I insert that function, and basically the input goes into that. The new input goes into that function number 2, and function number 2 calls on number 1. So now I've expanded the footprint, the interface of my application to have 2 functions. And if I don't have the test, I've now expanded what could go wrong. And if I go and code the second function and look at the browser, I could get a scenario where I have 2 different spots that I have expectations for, and I am checking on the browser and hoping that it tells me which one is going wrong if they do. Whereas if I write a second test, and we'll call this the unit test. The unit test is going to be pointing at my second function. And it says, hey, if you give the second function some input, what output do you expect? The test kind of knows, hey, I expect that function 2 is going to call on function 1, but I don't care about function 1. Somebody else, another piece of code, is responsible for testing 1. I'm responsible for the inputs that go into 2 and the inputs that come out. And so now if a problem comes up, if something I triggered or something that I give to function 2 triggers a bug on 1, then I should find out about it through my test. My test will say, hey, I was expecting data to go through these functions a certain way, and I found a scenario where it's not. But I have this automated check. I'm not going to the browser in this case to switch context, to keep on going back and forth. But either which way, the thing that has to be clear is that I am doing test-driven development either way. But one of them, over the long haul, is more productive because it takes less time over, like, the complaint that always comes up is TDD, writing tests per code is just double the code. And I also have to expand my expertise to do it. And it's not critical for me getting just this thing working. But the other argument is that you're still testing every step of the way. Every time you write a new piece of code, you're going to go look at the browser or go look at the database. And what happens is, over time, that footprint, that interface of your code gets so big, one pattern is still using the browser or the database as a single point of indication of pass or fail, and another has a code base that runs every single time you make a change, and honestly, way faster pinpoints the problem or tells you everything's still stable. And so psychologically, over time, having that set of tests of just unit tests, we'll get into integration and other tests later, but just having that unit test library hitting your code every time you push, and that includes if you update packages or gems or Python modules, whatever the heck they call them. Anytime you upgrade anything, you get instant feedback without having to go through and run your app, so to speak, manually, that this change I made here didn't have a butterfly effect over there. And that's the power of it, but it's not immediate. And I think people that test manually get used to it, so it's maybe not a big deal to them. But once you get bit by the bug of, I don't even have to look at the browser for the first 75% of what I'm coding because I have a bunch of tests that are actually telling me you should be pretty good. It's amazing how much time you save, and it's amazing how often you can keep your context in that development editor compared to switching back and forth. So that's how I respond to your statement of I can just test in the browser and I'm fine. I'm not arguing that that's not the case. I'm saying that I feel like later on, if you knew the benefits otherwise, you'd say, yeah, it's probably, if I'm building something for a business to use, I should give it more thought on how much testing I want to put in place in the beginning because I'm going to do it anyway. I guess that's what I'm reaching at.
Yeah. And I can't ever argue against. It's very hard for me to put together an argument because we're not talking about Apple.
Yeah.
If we're talking about an application of size, a system of size.
Yeah.
The where I'm going to get caught, okay, because I can already see it, is, okay, this little thing I'm running, I input things into an HTML form, it produces a PDF, and it produces a Trello card.
Yeah.
That's it. Did I really need tests for that? Maybe, maybe not. And I'll get back to, I have a point about tests being trivial, and I want to dive into that. So I'm going to put that to the side for a second. But I can also see that once that piece of this is built, Well, then it's not a long hop to go from, okay, you fill out this HTML form, it kicks out a PDF, it fills out a Trello card, it emails the person it's being dispatched to. And then once it's done, it displays all your work orders and you can start to manipulate all. And then all of a sudden, I've written this huge system that I have no test for.
Yeah.
So I get the argument that you're going to get there anyway. You might as well get there earlier than later. This is a lack of experience and a lack of use of it. You sitting there telling me that if I were to write my test first, I could just code something, see that the test passed, and just move on without even looking at the browser. I don't buy. I can't imagine a scenario where that makes any sense to me.
Oh, I know, but it does.
Because
I'm telling you, I do it all the time. I do it. I do it in Rails way more than I do it in JavaScript. I'll save the reason why later. But
how many years were you in Rails before you reached that comfort level?
Okay, let's talk about my history on Rails and TDD. I became a Rails developer with Vibes Media, I think 7 years ago. And I worked there for a year, and I didn't write a lick of tests. I didn't write any. I barely knew Rails. They were fine for me to learn on the job because I was in the job 80 hours a week for that particular job. And I quit 8 months later because of that. But they didn't care about code quality for what I was doing. They gave me no resources. I had no one else on the team to pair with. And I knew this was a problem because I was doing tons of projects and things were breaking very frequently. And I'm like, I know there's a slice of the Rails community that really gets into TDD, and I should know more about it, but I just don't have time and I don't have anyone to help me. Then I went to DevMind Software, and testing was a philosophy there that if you weren't into it, you ain't working there. And so immediately I had to ask questions and basically say, I don't know how to test. Show me what I need to do here. And the team of people that worked there were way better than me on the engineering level, and they taught me. They showed me examples. It became part of the way we worked. Now, TDD, test-driven development, by the philosophy is that you code the test first and then write the code to make the test pass. And I'm going to be honest, I don't do it that way, really. Sometimes I do if I'm in a role, if I got a role going on, I'm really cranking out stuff and I know exactly what I want to do. But honestly, sometimes I write the code and just so I can see something happen. And then I write the test to ensure it always happens. And I'm fine. I'm fine with that. Like, I don't care if I'm not following it to a T. But I can say without reservation that you do, when you get into a state of focus and you understand the code base and you understand what kind of what the testing will do, you will write 4 or 5 tests sometimes without looking at the browser. It's almost like a game. You're like, I want to see how much of this I can get to pass and to see if what I expect to render will do so. And you don't always nail it 100%. It's almost scary if you do. Like, you don't believe your tests if they all pass. In fact, you sometimes force them. The philosophy is make sure it fails first and then make it pass, even if you're not doing it before you write the other code.
Sure.
But yeah, so the short answer is I coded in Rails at least 1.5 years before I ever got into the TDD or into the RSpec kind of work. And then I have never written a Rails app since that does not have RSpec running against just the basic code. I can't say that about Node. Can't say that about React all the time. And that has to do with the learning curve aspect. But for the Rails, it's just part of the culture, and it's part of, like, there's so much work that has been done on the testing side. So I do it as just a habit, and it's that assurance makes me. That's why I enjoy the Rails piece so much.
Well, let me prosecute you a little then and
Yeah.
interrogate you a little. So, if it makes so much sense for you to do it with Rails, and you become a convert, and that you completely understand the why and so forth, what held you back from doing it on the JavaScript side?
The same. Well, one front end is a bit different than the back end. To me, the server world doesn't really have events. It has request response. That's really
Right.
in middleware. And I find that to be a very simple pattern to write tests around. I have written tests for React apps, but I haven't always like the front end and the clients change so drastically because of designers and design teams that you can completely blow away the work you've done testing on a few simple changes on components. That's not a excuse. That's just a reason why I had some trouble. The other is I don't run into a lot of JavaScript developers that believe in testing as much as I've met Rails developers. And while testing is important to me, I work in an environment where clients won't budget for it. And so it's not something I can always, it does take extra time. Anyone that tells you that you don't need to spend extra time running, like doing tests, I don't believe that. You are writing code that works against other code. It will take time, and it will take time to learn and do it right. So, and the other item I would say is that APIs, external services, are hard as crap to test, or to at least mock and act like they're responding. So, case in point,
Sure.
I'm using Firebase Auth for chasms, and we've got React on the front end, Firebase on the back end, Firebase Auth as for authentication. So I have to write some tests that essentially say, act like you're reaching out to Firebase, act like Firebase is getting back to you with a certain amount of data, and then your test kind of checks that something is being, like a request would have been sent, and that something would have been received, and then that your app reacts the way it should. That you expect this request to be made, a response to be given, and your code responds accordingly. And that's tough. That's tough because you got to figure out, what are you sending to Firebase Auth? What is Firebase Auth sending back? What happens if that changes? And then you got to figure out what your app's going to do. And that's a much different, I don't control all the pieces. And in fact, I need to prevent, I can't be hitting in Firebase Auth with tests. I can't have it every time I run a test suite. Firebase Auth is like, why do you keep asking me about this user, this test user?
Right.
Because they'll shut you down. So it is harder, and it's even harder in Rails. It's not like Rails and APIs are great any better. It's harder. It's still hard to do. So that's my answer.
I wonder. So now this becomes a philosophy and a thought exercise. So one of the newer paradigms within the JavaScript world is functional programming, and pure functions.
Yeah.
And when you're describing tests and the things that are easy to test and things that are hard to test, I'm hearing things that are easy to test, pure functions. Things that are hard to test, non-pure functions.
Oh yeah, totally.
So because that's the definition of a pure function, right? You put something in, you're always going to get the same thing out.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much, and this is an unanswerable question, but I wonder how much this move or this movement of functional programming came out of the TDD world, came out of those people thinking the same things, and they've just shifted their focus. Not saying they've done away with tests, but they're saying if you want to make if you want to make tests, then this is the way to do it. You do it with pure functions.
So you're on the right track. There's two libraries that have taken what you just said and have kind of incorporated that into not just testing, but also their compiler. Elm is a front-end library that competes with React and Ember and Vue and Angular for attention. And that it is functional, it is compiled, and it is big on it's big on limited testing, because the idea is you are writing functions to always do what you said. You give it a particular input, it will always give you the same output. You never mutate state with the function, so to speak.
Right.
And then the other one is Elixir. Phoenix is the framework. Elixir is the code base. And the guy that kind of is one of the spearheaders of that is a guy named, I think it's pronounced Jose Valim. And he was the guy that wrote Devise, what we use in Rails for authentication and authorization. He moved to the Elixir world because he wanted Rails to have this pure function type of like workability, functionality, but he wasn't going to get that with Ruby. Ruby is never going to do that. And he also loved testing. He was big on TDD. So it is like, TDD didn't come, function. I think this whole functional coding paradigm comes out of this idea that code quality and predictability is a key feature for code quality. So yeah, if you pay any attention to those two libraries, they in the early days were very much on the TDD and the pure function train as a result of that. So I think you're right.
Yeah, and I just wonder if they're two sides of the same coin. They don't do the same thing, but they same philosophy behind coding, right?
Yeah.
And I also think those are two of the bars here in downtown Orlando, Elm and Elixir.
Yeah,
I know there's an Elixir.
Every city has an Elixir bar like that. That's a good one. Elm sells furniture to old people, I think, but
or maybe Elixir is on Elm Street. Who knows?
Well, I think we are old people, so I can't really.
So what I think first is going to happen is we're going to be in the same place here in about 7 days. And we're going to be working on some stuff. I think we're going to take some time, and I'm going to open up the code that I've been working on, and we're going to work through some of what should these tests look like, because this is the other point I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
And it fits the pure function idea as well. Is a lot of times, at least in the examples I've seen, the tests seem very trivial.
Yes.
You pass it a 5, I want a 10 coming out the back end.
Yep.
I'm like, okay, great, yay. I guess that makes sense, but that doesn't always tell me I've broken something. It just tells me I've broken something in between that calculation, so to speak.
You're really good on the segues today, because that's the next point. That's the next point to make. So the Rails world has had a bit of a focus change. I was really talking a lot about unit tests, but what we should transition to is the integration tests. What happens when you have multiple units of your app talking and working together? How do you test that? And in Rails, you have models and views and controllers that all work in sync. And so it's one thing to do, like you said, give me a 2 it spits out a 10. Give me a 5, it spits out a 13. Like, those are unit tests. They're very simple. They need to be. They should be. And they're testing very small, very small compartmentalized bits of code. But now you need function 1 to talk to function 14, and you need that to result in something on the screen. So now you're more in the world of integration tests. And it's essentially saying, if a user gives an input of so and so, then this is what you should see on the screen. This is what elements like if we're going to match against the DOM, this is what we see spit out. This is the text we see rendering. These are the buttons of the form. This is the message we're handing to the user as a pop-up or something. So you're right in that, and there are a lot of people that agree with you, that unit testing has been overdone and that integration testing is what you want to do. And there are at least Selenium being one of them. And that's even more on the acceptance level, but you have in the integration world, you also need to write tests between controllers and models, and between, if something happens on the model, what does the view do? And so you start to write these higher level tests that don't care about the innards. They care about, at a very more abstract level, action, event, input happens. Here's what happened. Like, this is what we expect. Those are more complex. There's no doubt that integration tests are typically harder to write, and you will not see simple, give me a 5, now give me a 10 type of input outputs.
Sure.
But that's the next question, is how much of that have you been able to work with before? Because you worked with people that did it, right?
Sure. And I've worked I've worked on big complex things that we had integration testing, we had unit testing, we had smoke tests, we had everything.
Yeah.
So we've worked on all that before. And when we're talking about health insurance systems, it makes sense. And we're talking about big monolithic enterprise systems, it makes sense. I guess what always, at the end of the day, the calculus is how much time do you spend building these tests versus just finishing the code? And I don't know that there's a right answer to all that. We've talked in the past about code coverage and percentages of code coverage and things like that. And the interesting dynamic there is, I think it's very hard. I won't say it's impossible because I don't know. I would think it's very hard for you to say 100% of our code is tested. You can't introduce a bug without one of our tests failing.
Based on the conversations I had with all of the folks at DevBind, they are 100% in agreement with you that there is no such thing as 100% coverage, and that it's impractical to aim for that number.
Sure.
It's not just impractical, it's a complete waste of time. And you're aiming to cover the most important things. So when you a few minutes ago or a minute ago, you said, well, how much time do you put on this? Like, how do you judge that? And I would say two areas of a website that I typically work on: search. It's really important that when someone types in certain values, that we have faith that our search engine is going to give back accurate results, because that results in money. Someone's going to buy something because they can get a search running correctly. Now, am I going to be able to test every single item we have in the database? No. But there's a lot of different scenarios that we can test to know, hey, if this person misspells something, is the search engine tuned well enough to handle misspellings? If a user types in just a basic name, will it give back a result set with that name there? I mean, I don't know. I can definitely tell you that using Elasticsearch and WebStorm in the past, that having a test suite hammering the testing server saved me so much time. Not having to go in and type the same crap all the time and hit submit or hit search was huge. So also the flip side is e-commerce. If a user can't get a payment made on an order they have in a cart, you are losing so much money on that bug. If you aren't getting a marketing advertisement in the top corner of your site, it's arguable how much of a ding that is. But if I click submit on a credit card payment and a bug comes up that was very easy to prevent, because it's really a simple, like you said, a pure function of, hey, they hit submit and our calculation system should run tax against it. Like, you can predict that. You can predict that the tax system will analyze the value provided on the order and what it should come back with based on the state. You can test that scenario, and it's not really complex numbers and code. But if you do it wrong and you don't catch it for a month, that's potentially thousands of dollars you have to go, and you can't grab it back from the user who already did their order. You now have a faulty tax system, and you got to go pay the tax man for that error. So
Right.
I think you pick the areas of your application where errors cost the most here, and then you attack that first. You don't aim for 100%. You aim for the most valuable percent. That's how I think you approach it.
And I think the example you just gave of a checkout of submitting payment may be the easiest example to sit here and we could spend forever on this one example and say this is why testing is important. Okay, because let's say we just built a form. All it does, we're building this thing incrementally. So the first thing it does is we just enter an amount, we hit submit, and that's how much gets charged to a credit card. Then we come back later and we say, okay, we're going to enter in the things the person bought. We want the system to calculate the tax once we hit submit, and then it'll produce the right number. Right there, that's a perfect example of something that, yeah, absolutely you need to have tested. And I can't argue this one. I'm well for it. If we say 10, I want 10 to be what gets submitted to the processor. If we say 10 plus 10 plus 7% tax, I want 2140 sent to the processor. Those are, and we're back to unit tests again, right? We're not talking integration tests. Those are very simple to wrap the brain around, because all of a sudden the next thing is, okay, now we have to add shipping, but shipping isn't taxed. So you have to add it after you tax, and so on and so forth. And this is where getting those written requirements, you turn those around to, you take the written requirements, you go and you change your tests first.
Yeah.
And then you start coding. And if you change your tests first, then it's going to immediately fail before you change coding, and then you're red-green refactoring.
Yeah.
And that was probably the perfect example of where we could come up with scenarios where it just makes a ton of sense to be doing testing.
But I also think that you were talking about unit tests, and I'm saying that an integration test on a something like a checkout form, huge, because users are going to make mistakes, and you need to catch that. You have to catch your own code mistakes and user interface mistakes to make sure a purchase goes through. And so being able to have an automated process that types in values into the field, you understand that the validation works, and then you're able to click submit. Like, there's a lot of code on the back end that's working, and you can't directly test that with the integration test approach, but it's still vital to try to mimic what kind of bad steps can a user follow that we need to recover from to keep these purchases going. And what's the most important thing is that I need to know that if you come in behind me and make a change to the payment form or make a change to the tax calculation, that my expectations are maintained.
Right.
And you and I are not talking all the time because we're too busy. I just said to you, Don, go in and I think the tax on Delaware change, go in and change, like make an adjustment. And you go in and you change the wrong thing. Why? Because I didn't tell you the right thing, or you just didn't listen to me. It's more likely the second thing, but still.
Yeah, whatever.
So that problem, that bug occurs, and through nothing other than normal work style. And a test suite, you run the test suite after you do your code and you say, oh crap, there's a test here that says I affected something from what the previous developer, me, was expecting. And it catches that. And we aren't stepping on each other's toes. And so the attitude at shops that do TDD or that have testing philosophies, it should be very, very difficult for you to break the build, to break the production build. Because we should have a significant number of tests that prevents the butterfly effect of random changes in the code base.
Sure.
And that's the integration.
Go ahead.
That's the integration benefit.
So last question, and then we'll wrap for today.
Sure.
When you're talking about testing and developing in teams, should the developer who is coding the work be the developer who codes the test?
If you've got a well-oiled machine with people pairing, I would say if you can pull off the test to code thing, that'd be awesome. I've never been able to do that, but it would be pretty cool to do it. I mean, I think that'd be great. I just don't know how many companies would ever give you that kind of budget of time, to be honest. Because
and here we're going to talk ideal situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the ideal situation, if I write the test, I've got the business requirements. I write the test, I interpret, I ask questions. And then you turn around, you get the business requirements, you write the code, you ask questions of and all that. That's now two people who have gone through that thought process of interpreting the business requirements instead of just a single one.
Yeah.
And that's a huge benefit. And there's no doubt of that either. So that was a question. As you were talking, I was like, you know what? The ideal situation is somebody else writes the test. And that's where I think we end up is I'm going to continue coding and I'm going to tell you to go write my test for me.
Yep. That's how it works.
All right. So no, good. Thank you for that. I'm still not convinced, but like I said, we'll spend time together and you can convince me some more.
Well, yeah, I think we should do that. I think I need more practice on the JavaScript side. I've used Jest and Mocha before, but I haven't done anywhere near what I've done in Rails. So we should definitely do that. We'll be together next week for a sports related thing, which I'm sure everyone would love to hear more about that.
Of course.
So we'll have to record being face to face again. But we should definitely, we'll be in Atlanta Monday and Tuesday, some parts of the day. So we should definitely do a little bit of testing and see how far we get.
Sure.
It'll be a little bit of learning on the fly, but I've always found that to be good too.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a little bit of investigation into Jest, and we'll go from there.
All right. Sounds good. Talk to you next week.
See you later.
Thanks for listening to This Old App. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at www.thisoldapp.online. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. For questions, comments, or things you would like to hear on future shows, please email us at hello@thisoldapp.online. Show music is Guns Blazing by Fab Claxton, licensed by Pond 5. Voiceover work by MeganVoices.com. You'll hear from us soon.